Hey mamas. I hope that everyone is having a beautiful day. I really want to share my little piece on free birth and the importance of protecting free birth because it is our right as women to birth our babies in freedom, however that looks to you. Whatever birthing in freedom looks like in your mind's eye is how you deserve to birth your baby. And if you're not aware, I'll very briefly fill you in, but an article from The Guardian was written about the Free Birth Society and the whole scandal that's been unraveling this past year. But it really is hard for, I think, these journalists to encapsulate what they are trying to convey to the masses about Free Birth Society without also demonizing the choice to free birth. Because what has taken place with the Free Birth Society, that company, that business, is very separate from free birth in its natural form, which has been done since the beginning of time. I know in my last episode, I touched on the importance of women being able to have aligned support in birth and in their pregnancies and postpartums, and how we need to really protect authentic midwifery so that women are not forced to birth without assistance and without support that they're desiring. But I also very firmly believe that women should have the right to choose free birth if that's what they want. I don't think that one has to exist without the other or cancel out the other. I think that women should have the choice, period. Period. Whether that be birthing in a hospital, birthing at home in a bathtub alone, or supported by a traditionally trained midwife who respects women, love women, and support women. And just witnessing the unraveling of just all of the craziness that has taken place in free birth society, I can't help but wonder and fear that free birth itself is also getting a bad name and has a lot of fear wrapped around it now because of all of these tragic stories that are coming to surface. And yeah, those stories are real, those stories are real. But I also think, and I say this with as much love and compassion in my heart, that women need to think for themselves, especially in the realm of birth, because I think that the, big lesson here from the Free Birth Society scandal is that we cannot put all of our trust in another person, in a human. We're all flawed and we all need God. We all need God. And we all need to be guided by God. And just because free birth is a safe and aligned choice for one woman does not mean it is the safe and aligned choice for all women. And I think it's very dangerous. And I spoke on this a couple of years ago, actually. This was when I first got pregnant with my son. And I was untangling a lot of like birth trauma and just really sitting with the reality of all of the decisions I've made in my life in regards to motherhood and birth and pregnancy and all of that. And monetizing birth, making profit off of birth can be so tricky. And I remember like at this point, I was really sort of this was where I was like slowly starting to step away from social media birth work, if that makes sense. Because I never truly stepped away from birth work in my real life. Like, I've always been supporting women in person and, walking with women in varying ways, whether it's like professionally or in like my personal life with people that I know and love. But I was really starting to step away from this persona that I was kind of creating on social media, where I was, really wanting to make money with birth, because birth is my jam and it's where my skill set lies, and what I've trained to be good at, like, supporting women in birth. So I wanted to make a birth course and make money selling this birth course, and all of these different ways that I was trying to monetize birth. And then I was also witnessing like all of these other amazing women, doing the same and having the same goals. And I got pregnant with my son, and I don't know, there was just such a major shift that happened in me. And if you've been following me for some years, I'm sure you were witnessing this happen. I just found myself in the role of, the mother and the pregnant woman, the woman preparing for birth, and the consumer, if you will, like what it's like to be pregnant and looking for what it is that you are desiring for support, and all of the options for different birth courses and different types of support. And oh, you can get this flavor or that flavor. And it was so overwhelming, because in all of this are other people's opinions on birth and what's right and what's wrong, and you should do it this way and you shouldn't do it that way. And I got a taste of how bitter it tasted to be in that space. And I really had to take a huge, huge, huge pause. And even kind of pivoted like career wise for a minute, just like really wanting to, that was my way of being like, okay, you are not doing birth work anymore because this is icky. And I didn't want to feel icky. I didn't want to be a part of the overwhelm that takes place, in the birth space, and, throwing my opinions in the air and like hoping that it lands. And yeah, I was forced into really like witnessing and feeling how sacred birth is, and how important it is that I keep my very loud opinions to myself unless it's asked, and, sometimes I do have clients who are genuinely curious of what my, beliefs are, and are curious to see what I would do in a situation. And, sometimes it's tricky, but I try to share things in a way that's respectful. But on social media, it's just so aggressive. And I realized how disruptive it can be too, because I do believe that as pregnant women, we're called to really become in tune with our own intuition and our own communication with God. And that can get so blurred and foggy when we are constantly consuming other people's opinions and beliefs around birth and around what we, should be doing in pregnancy and postpartum and this, that, and the third. And, although it can be helpful sometimes and eye-opening to see things from another perspective, I understand the value in that. I think that it can be so overwhelming, though, with all of the birth workers who are, very loud and um, excited and passionate about what they believe in. But it's like being pregnant and being on the consumer end of it, it's like, whoa, this is a lot to sift through. And I consider myself a pretty knowledgeable person when it comes to birth and very in tune with my body and with God and my intuition. And I still felt like, whoa, this is kind of overkill. And yeah, so anyways, not to speak on that for too long, but I did take time away from the birthstagram, and it really wasn't until pretty recently that I have been slowly kind of stepping back into putting some birth related content out there, but I do it in a way that's very conscious because I know the impact that it has. And I want to be careful to not come off as persuading a woman to choose something in a certain way because of my own opinions and beliefs. Because I also have the awareness that I've come to my opinions and beliefs through my experiences. And that I think is a really important piece, is that sometimes people have to experience things in a very specific way to have a certain level of understanding, to be able to, step into a different place where they can have a different experience. And I think that when women are, pressured into seeing things the way that you see it, or choosing the type of birth that you want, it's like, is that safe? Like, this is now we're treading on like in danger zone here, because women should not be pressured or persuaded or manipulated into making certain decisions ever when it comes to their bodies and their babies. And we know this because we, as birth workers, know how dangerous it is when the medical complex does that. And that's why a lot of us have jobs as doulas because we understand this to be a fact, that when women are pressured to make certain decisions, or not even pressured in the sense that we think of it, but just like, when you have something kind of just dangling in front of you and it's like, don't you want to choose this? Isn't this what's best? Like when we have, prenatal care in the system and a very medicalized provider, constantly dangling the option of an epidural or an induction when we are at our like absolute last ounce of patience in pregnancy at 39 weeks, and all we really need is support in just, sticking with it and, staying on track. We have like the provider like, but I can just give you the membrane sweep now and we can get things going. And it's like, yeah, it seems like gentle nudging and it's not like super pressure and manipulative, but it is a form of pressure and manipulation. And we see this playing out in different flavors all throughout the birth space. And it is sad to see women in vulnerable places. Pregnancy is a very, you're in so much power as a pregnant woman. You're so in tune with everything, and it can be the most magical time where you're thriving and just feeling so in your power. But it can also be a very vulnerable time, which is why we need, or some women feel like they need support in that time. And I think it's probably the majority of us truly do desire aligned support in that. Some would say that they don't, and that's totally fine too. And it's up to us, to choose that for ourselves. But because of the vulnerable time that is, it's even more important to be mindful of how we're speaking to pregnant women and understanding, like, yeah, we should be keeping our biases in check for the most part. I'm not saying that we should be bystanders to violence. That's an entirely different topic that I'm not speaking on. I'm talking about when it comes to birth decisions. We need to give space to the woman to choose and choose what's safe for them at that time. And I do really, really feel like free birth is not safe for everyone at all points in their, adulthood. I think that some women genuinely don't feel safe at home birthing their baby. And in that scenario, of course, it is not safe to free birth because you are in a state of fear, and that is not conducive to a healthy, smooth birth. That's just what it is. And I think it's silly for women to say otherwise, because it's like, well, who are you to say what's right, and then even in choosing that for yourself, I think it's really important to sit with that in solitude. Like, seriously, if you're choosing free birth, well, then you should really be getting comfortable with your own thoughts and your intuition, and making that line of communication between you and God so clear that there's no way that a message can go unseen or unheard from him. And I think that that's the tricky part with the free birth society, is that women come to this place of choosing free birth, whether that be from a trauma response of having a really traumatic situation and then resorting to that because they feel like they have no other options, which makes total sense. Or just really being like, yeah, I'm ready for that. And I don't want someone to support me because I feel like I don't need that. Well, then that is the moment where seeking assistance from other people just doesn't really make sense, because they're not going to be at the birth. And ultimately, that is a form of outsourcing. And if you are outsourcing and you feel the need to outsource so much to the point where you are essentially putting your care in another woman's hands, then maybe free birth was not the choice all along. Maybe that was not what you were meant to choose. And I think that's what a lot of women are realizing. And I hope, at least, that women are being awakened to this truth of, like, yes, free birth is an option, but it's a big choice to make. That is a big choice to make. I know from experience and from witnessing that I think a lot of times women don't realize what they signed up for until they're already in it. And I think in that scenario, it is okay to acknowledge that and then go seek the help that you need. But I think that because social media has just popularized this and glamorized this in such a way that it's become this like little click where it's like, oh, I'm a free birthing mom. And look, not to say you shouldn't proudly wear that name if that's what you want to like label yourself, but I think that we're kind of getting to this point of like Mean Girls birth version. I hate to say it, but once again, like I wrote about this in my Substack when I said that I was going to peace out of the birth world, but didn't actually. But it's because that's what I get. That's the feeling. It's the ill. Why is there a hierarchy that was created? That's what's dangerous. And I think the way to avoid these traps that the enemy has like clearly infiltrated in like the natural birth space and has put all these traps out for women to, fall for. I think the way to really avoid those traps is to never put your power in another woman's hands. Never listen to someone else's 2 cents before checking in with yourself and God. And ultimately, if you are going to choose free birth, I think that it takes 9 months of internal preparation for. I really believe that. I really, really believe that. And what I mean by internal preparation is like, get right with God, get in tune with your intuition, and really think it all through. Work through the fears, work through the trauma, work through the biases that you have, and yeah, surrender to the process. And I don't think that you should be seeking assistance from someone else, because that gets dangerous, because you're walking this line of like, I'm gonna do it alone, but then you have like one foot out where you're like, oh, but I still need some help. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with asking for help at all, but why do you need the help? And if you need help, is it because you actually want assistance at the birth and you're just worried that you won't find something that's in alignment with who you are and what your desires are? Because I would really search through that, and I would try to really unravel all of the conditioning that has been done. We have all been conditioned by Birthstagram. If you've spent even a little bit of time in those streets, it is not for the faint of heart. And if you're surfing that space newly pregnant, I will say that it comes with risk. Yes, you can learn a lot, but keep your conditions in check and really think through what is being rewired in your brain. Are you being wired to feel shame going to a hospital and getting help when it's necessary? Are you being wired to feel guilty for hiring a traditional midwife because now you can't say that you had a free birth and you might be judged by some of the other free birthing moms that you roll with? Like, ask yourself these things, because it's important to really understand why you are choosing that. But I stand by the truth that free birth needs to be protected. And a part of protecting free birth is choosing it wisely, is choosing it in full alignment and using your intuition and God to guide you. And if you want to take a birth course and whatever, else to help you feel more comfortable, doing it with major discernment and really keeping your conditioning in check at all times. Because ultimately, you are responsible for this choice that you're making. And if you do want support, own that and don't feel shame for it, because it's very much in our nature to want to walk with women in this very sacred process that is pregnancy, birth, and postpartum and motherhood. Like, there is no shame in that whatsoever. And yes, it might be tricky to find someone that's truly in alignment, but I'm telling you, there's a way. When there's a will, there's a way. You will find the woman that's meant to walk this path with you. But if it's just free birth for you and you're going to walk this path with your partner, I think that it's so important to really understand what you're getting yourself into and know that it is a lot to carry. And if you're willing to carry all of that, then you go, mama, have your free birth. But I think that it has just become way too common in the birth space to tell other women how to do it. And that, oh, I did it, so you should too. And this is what's best. That is dangerous. That is dangerous. And I stand by that because I've seen the ripple effects of that. And I also want to I want to throw this in there too. I didn't want to make a podcast episode solely on this topic, but I do think that women need to use major discernment when they are subscribing to certain ideologies that are thrown out as facts on Instagram, birth Instagram. And one thing that I want to say is that there are some pages out there who think that they are the know-all be-all of birth. And I have a very long time ago unfollowed pages like that because in my own pregnancy, I found that it was very disruptive to my mental well-being to having to constantly swipe by those like heavily opinionated posts where, women think like, oh, because it's good for one, it's good for all, because it was good for me, it's good for all, or because it wasn't good for me, it's not good for any, like, though, way too extreme, like, way too extreme. And honestly, like, a lot of these pages are mirroring the very system that they are trying to escape. And a lot of them need to be humbled. And I will not name names ever, but like, yeah. Anyways, I think that it comes with good intention, but sometimes a little bit of fame, it does tricky things. And like, yeah. But this whole like hate against water births and water births being dangerous for everyone and don't get in the water because you're going to kill your baby. Like, no. The science does not back that up. The studies that were used as leverage in this whole thing are incredibly small studies to the point where I would not even give it time of day. And then the studies that were bigger were completely misunderstood by the person who posted about it initially and started this whole train wreck. And I really cannot emphasize how important it is to have discernment and to think for yourself, because there's a part of like the free birth space where it's like one birth worker says something and then everyone hops on the bandwagon, and then all of a sudden there's like 20 posts in the same week about the same topic, and you're like, oh my God. And then you're being bombarded by this opinion so much to the point where your brain starts to think, oh, this must be a fact. This must be true. And this is a clear example of, the dangers of following in these trends. I do not believe that water birth is innately dangerous. I think that it can be for some people, just like any kind of birth can be dangerous for some people, taking in all of their health and all of the factors of their labor experience into account. Of course, there is not a one size fits all for anyone. But I will say that our body is very intelligent. Of course, there's a way to overuse water that can lead to bad outcomes, just like anything can lead to bad outcomes depending on how it is used. And I think it's very unwise to fearmonger around water, because for some, this is an incredible tool that allows them to have a birth that's free of pharmaceuticals, that is free of being in the hospital, transferring to the hospital for pain meds. And I think that it's silly to fearmonger based off of these very small studies, when in reality there are much bigger studies that have been done that have proven water to be quite safe during birth. And again, birth is so nuanced, and people come with their own health setup. I don't want to say health issues or not, because some people just don't have health issues, and that's great. But we all have our constitutions that we come to birth with. And yes, certain things are not going to work for everyone. But this is why at the end of the day, you have to go inward and trust your intuition. Just hanging in this birth space for quite some time, that anything that is too extreme sounds off to me. And so I'm always going to sort of question the validity of it. And just intuitively speaking, it does not make sense that this would be harmful for everyone. And I think that if you're being called to not have a water birth, listen to that. If you are being called to get in the water when you're 9 centimeters dilated, I wouldn't let this whole fear-mongering stop that, because you're following your intuition and what your body and baby are telling you to do. And it's probably going to work out if you're being called to do that. I personally did not feel called to get into water. Actually, I got into water and I was like, nope. And I went onto my bed, and 2 minutes later started pushing my son out. And I'm really glad that it happened that way. I don't know why. I had an inner knowing to not be in the water, but I'm sure it was for a reason. Does that mean that I'm going to hop on the hate water birth fear-mongering bandwagon? No, because I've seen water be a saving grace for women. I've seen really positive outcomes from being in water. So, all of this extreme, this and that, it's the theme of this conversation. And I think that it's pretty clear that what I'm alluding to is that it's these very extreme mindsets that lead to destruction. And this is pretty much for all things in life. And I'm gonna end it on that note, because I think actually in order to save free birth, and what I mean by that is to protect it, to make it an option for us all still, and not have the GOV all up in our life trying to tell us how we're allowed to birth or not. I think the true way to protect free birth is by ridding these very, very extreme mindsets that exist out there. And understanding that birth is very nuanced, and what's good for one may not be good for another, and that all women need to have their birth choices respected. Period. This is all with love, and I hope you have a beautiful day.